They told me for years there was no money in podcasting. Well, they were all wrong.
All right, let's talk a little Baseball Hall of Fame. Phil and I talked a little about the Hall of Fame and some controversies. Well, the voting took place for 2022, and the controversy sparked up once again. So the Hall of Fame process, a little refresher for everybody. So each voting cycle, qualified members of the BBWA, I guess the Baseball Writers Association of America, I'm assuming, name no more than 10 eligible players for whom they consider worthy of Hall of Fame honors. To be enshrined, a player must be named for at least 75% of the votes ballots. Currently, players are removed from the ballot if they are named on fewer than 5% of ballots or been on the ballot for 10 times without election. So that whole process, a little convoluted, but what do you think of the actual voting process and who gets to vote for the Hall of Fame?
So, you know, we said earlier, like, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But I think this is broken and it needs fixing. I have respect for the writers who are doing the voting simply because I think they watch the game a lot more carefully than anybody else does. However, I don't know. They get 100% of the say. Is that right?
Yes. They only they vote. So no players, no MLBPA, the Players Association, no nothing. It's just the writers.
Right. I think that needs to change, and I don't have the solution, but like maybe there needs to be a percentage that is former baseball players, particularly. I don't know if it would have to necessarily be guys that are already in the hall, but I think that makes more sense than opening it to anybody. And then maybe even, I don't know about managers, but somebody that's actually in the game. You know what I mean? Like actually watching the players on the field, things like that.
Yeah.
So I think there's room for improvement in that. And then they reduced the number from 15 to 10. Is that right? Like 10 years on the ballot and then you're done. It used to be 15.
I believe it was 2015. I had the stat, but I got rid of it because I didn't think it was relevant. So look, silly me. But yeah, it used to be 15. I believe in 2015, 2016, or 2018, they reduced it to 10.
And so like you look at guys like Bonds and Clemens, who now are no longer eligible. And I think like if it had been stretched out to 15, they would have made it in ultimately, but now they're, you know, they find themselves on the outside looking in. So was that the correct decision? Why did they reduce it from 15 to 10? Was there some logic to that, or do you know?
I have no idea. I wasn't 100% sure it was 10. I got this readout from Baseball Almanac, which is my number one spot for baseball statistics and analytics. But I don't know why they did it. I'm not going to put my conspiratory hat on and say it's because of Bonds and Schilling and all of them. I think they just figured it was just a well-rounded number. You know, the Hall of Fame is easily the most prestigious Hall of Fame in sports, the Baseball Hall of Fame, like easily, no questions asked. So maybe it was my best guess. They probably did this to keep up the honor because the Baseball Hall of Fame, it should be hard to get in. Like, there's a lot of people on the belt next year. I'm like, listen, Torrey Hunter, I love you as a player. You're not a Hall of Famer. I'm sorry.
He's Hall of Great. He's not Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was an outstanding player for a number of years, but I would not say that he's a Hall of Famer either. I agree with you on that. And maybe that's one of the reasons they dropped it to 10 is because, like, well, if you can't get in 10, then maybe you weren't meant to get in at all. Because we've seen guys squeak in year, 13, 14, or 15, where it's like, well, you're kind of borderline, and I don't know. There was, I forget the guy's name. Is it Ryan Thibodeau? Who basically like talked so much about, was it Larry Walker? Or there are a few guys that he just talked about so much on social media that it kind of like rallied the troops and got this guy into the Hall of Fame. And I love Larry Walker.
I was surprised Larry Walker got in, to be honest. I looked at his stats and I was like, huh, okay, fine. You know, but like, yeah, the past few years, I do think people did kind of eke in, even if they got bigger numbers. But last year, no one got in, 0, right, which is surprising. But that's the way that is. The thing that irks me with the system is the fact that only writers get to vote. I think now the MLBPA, I don't know if that's all players or former players, but I think they should have a say. They have the lockout right now. As of recording, this lockout's still going on. So they're going head to head with the owners. Hell, if you have not saying the game, fuck it. Put it, have some say in the Hall of Fame too.
Yeah.
But the thing that irks me, fewer than 5% of the ballot you just cut off, and the 10 years, one or the other makes sense, but both, it seems a little overkill.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say the other one though is why is it limited to 10 that you can vote for per year? Because I mean, there's times like you said, like last year nobody got in, and maybe that was fair, but there might be years where there's just an outstanding crop. And if you're saying, well, I can't vote for this guy as a first ballot Hall of Famer because I've got 10 guys ahead of him on my priority list, and I just don't understand the logic behind that.
Yeah, I don't either. That also really irked me. They only have 10 votes. But this year, man stands alone. David Ortiz, 394 total ballots, 296 voted for. So David Ortiz got 77.9% of the ballot, making him a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, when I saw he was on the ballot, as a Yankee fan, I said, hands down, yes, he is a Hall of Famer. Now, he was only a DH, didn't play half the game, but David Ortiz is a player who is extremely talented, incredibly clutch, the heart and soul of a city and the game, and one of the most well-liked players that I can think of in recent memory. Now, first ballot Hall of Famer, I think borderline. I wouldn't have been shocked if he got in next year, but not this year. But seeing 77.9% of the ballot, I think that's a perfectly fair number for him to get into the Hall of Fame.
Sure. Yeah. I think like you hit on something there that, well, we can touch on this later when we talk about other guys, but likability is such a huge factor. And that's, due in large part to the fact that it's the writers that are voting these guys in or snubbing them, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, man. Should likability take part into getting into the Hall of Fame? Because no, see, I say yes, because it works both ways. I mean, here's why. Like players who are likable, who is a face of the game. Like, yeah, Derek Jeter got like 100% of the votes almost because, yeah, he had the stats to back it up, but he's also super likable. I think it's fair both ways. Like, yeah, Bonds, Schilling's an asshole, right? That's a big reason why he didn't get in. He's an asshole. I'll say it. He's an asshole. But I also think his stats are borderline. So I think it's a little, I think it's a factor you can't ignore because we're human beings. It's impossible to ignore. If computers decided who was in the Hall of Fame, you got a point. But I just don't see it as the end of the world. But please prove me wrong.
Well, no, it's not that I'm saying it shouldn't be a factor. I think it's inevitable that it is, simply because it is humans voting for other humans, and biases always come into things like this, right? It's just like the hiring process. If you're running a business, well, if it's somebody that is your friend or someone you feel a connection with, they automatically get the benefit of the doubt more than someone you don't know. And so it kind of works the same way, although it's a slightly different criteria. But if you like someone, you're much more likely to tick the box next to their name on that ballot. Whereas if you didn't like them as a reporter, or when you were reporting, or as a member of the media, you're probably going to hesitate before you tick that box. It might take you a couple of years to soften up, and time heals a lot of wounds, and it might take a little bit more time, or might take some persuasion from other people. So that kind of makes sense. I get it, but I also don't feel like it's the nice guy Hall of Fame, right? I mean,
yeah.
If you got some outstanding players, you look at like Pete Rose and Barry Bonds, and just look at the numbers and look what they did for the game. Not even numbers, but just look at how they played the game and how they changed the game. And can you say solely on the grounds that you didn't like them or they were jerks that they shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame? Now, obviously, that's not the only factor that has removed them from the talk, but I don't know if that should be the deciding factor.
No, I agree. It definitely should not be the deciding factor. No, I 1,000% agree with that. Yeah, if you're holding a grudge because Barry Bonds called you a jerk and made you hurt your little feels, like, bro, get a new job. Sorry, like, guy should be a Hall of Famer.